Hello, my friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe.
I'd always thought camping was supposed to be peaceful. Fresh air, starry skies, the crackle of a fire, the occasional hoot of an owl. But that night changed everything I believed about the woods. I could still feel the fear in my chest, as if it's pressing against my ribs, even now, months later. It started as a simple trip. My three closest friends, Mark, Jess, and Tyler, and I have been planning a weekend away in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We wanted isolation, no cell service, just a few days to forget work, bills, and the endless noise of life. Tyler insisted he knew the perfect spot, a remote clearing near a stream, tucked behind thick pines. He'd been there once as a kid, he said, and the place was magical. We arrived in the late afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long, golden streaks on the forest floor. Birds called overhead, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. We set up camp, Mark struggling with the tent, while Jess collected firewood. Tyler wandered off to explore and came back bragging about a secret waterfall just a quarter-mile away. Everything seemed perfect until night fell. The fire burned brightly, casting our shadows against the surrounding trees. We told stories, laughed too loudly, and joked about the typical horror cliches. But as the forest darkened, a subtle unease settled over me. It started as a sound, a low, almost imperceptible scraping coming from just beyond the ring of our firelight. Probably just a raccoon, Mark said, tossing another log onto the fire. But I didn't hear anything like a raccoon. It was heavier, deliberate, slow, something that moved in a way no ordinary animal would. I tried to shake it off, but then the sounds multiplied. Branches snapped, leaves rustled. I thought I saw a shadow moving between the trees, too tall, too upright to be a deer. Jess noticed it too. Her laughter stopped mid-sentence, and her eyes were wide, scanning the dark tree line. "Maybe it's just Tyler playing a prank," she whispered. But Tyler was sitting beside me, staring into the fire. His face was pale, almost too still, and he didn't speak. Then we heard it, a whisper, faint at first, almost drowned out by the fire crackling, but unmistakably human. "Go, go." None of us said anything. We froze, listening. The whisper came again, closer this time, like it was circling us. Mark tried to laugh it off. "It's the wind. Trees, nature stuff." But I know what I heard. It wasn't the wind. It was intentional, directed, malevolent. We decided to stay inside the tent for the night. Tyler, Jess, and Mark agreed, though reluctantly. The tent was small, cramped, and the shadows of the firelight danced on its thin fabric. None of us slept. Every rustle, every snapping branch made our hearts pound. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the feeling of someone, or something, standing just outside the tent. I dared not move, hardly breathed. Then the zipper of the tent slowly creaked open. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused to work. A cold, damp breeze swept in, and then I smelled it. The metallic tang of blood, fresh, unmistakable. "Who's there?" I whispered, my throat tight. No response, only the whispering, repeating, circling. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jerked awake, my hand clutching empty air. I was alone in the dark, but the whispering continued, growing louder, almost chanting now. Morning light never felt so relieving. I bolted out of the tent, my friends already outside, looking pale and shaken. Did anyone else hear that last night?" I asked. Tyler swallowed hard. I thought I was imagining things. But yeah, something was out there. We decided to cut the trip short, pack up and leave. But as we walked back toward the trailhead, the forest seemed wrong. Too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. Even the stream sounded sluggish, like it was holding its breath. And that's when we saw them. Footprints. Not animal prints. Tall, thin, with elongated toes. Like the kind of thing you'd imagine from a nightmare. They circled the area where we'd camped and disappeared into the underbrush, moving in ways no human could. We quickened our pace, hearts pounding. By the time we reached the parking lot, we were shaking, pale, and quiet. But I noticed something I didn't want to admit at the time. The footprints weren't gone. They followed the edge of the lot, ending at the tree line, staring at us as we drove away. For months after, I tried to forget it. Friends dismissed it as paranoia, fear, and maybe mild hallucinations from exhaustion. But then Tyler sent me a photo out of the blue. A single grainy picture of our campsite. And in the corner, just behind a tree, I saw it, a shadow. Tall, thin, unmoving. Watching, waiting. I've never been camping since. I don't even hike anymore. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through my apartment, I hear it, the whispering call my name, telling me to go back. And I know one day, if I do, I might not come back. I've always been the kind of person who loves camping. Fresh air, quiet nights, starry skies. Nothing beats being away from the chaos of the city. So when my college friends suggested a weekend trip deep in the Smoky Mountains, I jumped at the chance. We didn't want a designated campground, no amenities, no people. Just us, the woods, and the promise of isolation. We arrived mid-afternoon, the sun low but warm, casting long, golden fingers through the trees. My friends, Katie, Sean, and Ben, were eager to set up camp. Ben, of course, insisted on bringing a portable speaker, which we argued over, but eventually left in the car when we realized there would be no service anyway. The clearing we found was perfect, a gentle slope, a small creek at the edge, and towering pines that blocked the road behind us. The first evening was pleasant. We built a fire, roasted some hot dogs, and laughed too loudly, telling stories that were half true and half exaggerated. As night fell, the forest seemed alive in ways I hadn't noticed during the day. The wind whispered through the trees, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground. I chalked it up to imagination. It was late when we went to bed. I couldn't sleep, though. There was something off. The creek's water sounded strange, like it was moving too quickly, rushing when it shouldn't. The trees groaned, though there was barely any wind. I kept thinking I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, shapes slipping between the pines, but every time I blinked, they were gone. Around midnight, I woke to a smell. Metallic, coppery sharp. My stomach twisted. The fire was out, though we'd left it smoldering. I stepped out of the tent, shivering, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Not just regular footprints. They were enormous, far too long for any person. Each step sunk into the soft earth, dragging slightly as though whatever made them was heavy and deliberate. They led in a circle around our campsite, then disappeared into the trees. I woke Katie and Sean quietly, trying not to panic Ben. Together, we scanned the darkness. We didn't hear anything at first, but then a figure emerged at the tree line. Tall, impossibly tall, hunched, its limbs long and thin. I could barely make out the face, if it had one, but the feeling of being watched, truly watched, paralyzed me. Sean whispered, "Maybe it's a hunter," but there were no lights, no movement, nothing human about it. It just stood there, watching, waiting. We decided to retreat into the tent, though the air felt heavy, suffocating. Every sound outside, snaps, rustles, even the water of the creek, made our hearts race. Hours passed. I couldn't tell if I slept or just dozed. When dawn broke, we cautiously peeked outside. The figure was gone. Relieved, but still shaken, we debated leaving. Ben wanted to stay, claiming it was probably just a bear. But Katie and I insisted we pack up. That's when we noticed something else. The trees weren't right. During the day, the forest looked normal. But at the edges of the clearing, near where the figure had been, the trees seemed distorted. Bark peeled in long strips, roots twisted unnaturally, and the air was heavy with the smell of rot. Sean touched one of the trees and hissed. The bark was cold, almost slimy, like wet skin. We decided to leave immediately. Hiking back to the car, we felt the forest closing in. The trail we'd taken to the clearing didn't seem familiar anymore. Twisting roots and brambles blocked our way, though the map and GPS confirmed we were moving in the right direction. Every few minutes, we caught glimpses of the figure or others like it between the trees. Sometimes one, sometimes many. Tall, thin, hunched. They never approached, but they never left either. They just watched. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, but the forest refused to end. Every clearing looked the same. Every tree seemed alive. Panic set in. My throat burned as I shouted, "This way!" But every direction looked identical, and the creek we had followed to reach the clearing was nowhere in sight. That's when I noticed the shadows. Even in daylight, they were too long, stretching unnaturally, and they moved against the light, shifting as though they had minds of their own. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but it didn't stop. The shadows seemed to reach for us. Ben finally broke. "We should have never come here," he muttered. "Something's wrong with this place." Katie pointed ahead. "Look, there was a faint trail, just a depression in the dirt, winding deeper into the forest." We hesitated, but it was either follow it or stay lost forever. We followed. The trail led to a clearing I will never forget. It wasn't like any other. The trees formed a ring, blackened at the base as though scorched by fire, though we had no idea how. In the center lay a shallow pit filled with water, but it wasn't water. It reflected the sky like glass, yet it moved, rippling even though there was no wind. And in that reflection, we saw them. Dozens of figures, taller than men, some hunched, some standing straight, all staring at us. I stepped back. The others froze. The reflections shifted, not following our movements, but moving independently. Their shadows reached out of the pool, stretching toward us. The air grew cold, wet and heavy. The metallic smell returned, stronger, sharper, almost burning our noses. Something in me screamed to run, but my legs refused. Then, as if sensing our hesitation, the figures moved. Not out of the reflection, out of the forest. They didn't walk. They glided impossibly fast, soundless. They didn't attack, not yet. They merely surrounded us, circling, pressing closer, their eyes, if they had eyes, boring into our minds. Then the pit rippled violently. One figure emerged, taller than the rest, its limbs impossibly long. It raised an arm, or something like it, and the others paused. The water in the pit surged, spilling over the edges, yet it made no sound. I will never forget what happened next. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed time. One moment we were standing there, frozen, the figures surrounding us. The next, I was alone. The clearing, the pit, the figures, they were gone. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction. I called for the others. Nothing. My voice felt swallowed by the forest. I ran blindly, tripping over roots and stones. Hours or minutes passed. The sun hung in the sky, never moving. Then I saw the car, or at least what looked like it. I stumbled forward, collapsing against the driver's door. Inside, everything was normal, just as we had left it. The keys were in the ignition. My friend were gone. I drove home, shaking, muttering their names. I reported them missing. Search teams found nothing. Not a trace of the campsite, the trail, or the figures. Just me, in the car, in the middle of nowhere. Months later, I still have nightmares. Sometimes I wake to see the shadows moving in my bedroom, stretching against walls, always reaching. And sometimes, in mirrors, I swear I see figures, tall, thin, impossible figures, watching, waiting. I never go camping anymore. I don't hike. I don't spend time in the woods. And yet, I know somehow they're still out there, watching, waiting. The worst part, I've realized something. They didn't take my friends. They only took time. Somewhere, somehow, they exist in the moments I can't remember, in a place I cannot follow. I am alone, but they are patient. And one day, they might let me find out where my friends really are. Until then, I live knowing that the forest is not just trees and wind. It's alive, it's patient, and it waits for anyone foolish enough to step too deep. I had always thought camping was supposed to be peaceful. Fresh air, quiet nights, the smell of pine and fire smoke. That's why I didn't understand why, as I drove up the winding road toward the ridge, my stomach kept twisting in knots. My friends and I had planned this trip for months, a weekend away from the city, far from phones, far from anything that reminded us of real life. Just the four of us, me, Laura, Nate, and Josh. Nate claimed he knew a perfect spot, a remote clearing near a small lake where no one ever went. We arrived in late afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, golden light spilling through the trees. The forest smelled sharp and alive. Birds flitted overhead, squirrels darted across the trail, and everything felt just a little too still. Nate laughed as we parked, tossing our packs onto the ground. "You'll see," he said, "this place is untouched. Nobody comes here. Nobody should." We hiked the final stretch and found a clearing. A small lake shimmered at the center, surrounded by pines whose branches leaned in as if to watch us. The ground was soft under our feet, littered with needles and broken twigs. We set up camp and gathered firewood, joking and teasing each other. As the sun sank, the water mirrored the sky like glass, perfect and still. That first night, everything felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every cracking branch, made me flinch. The others laughed it off, blaming it on nerves or imagination, but I couldn't. I could feel it. Something in the woods was observing us, patient, waiting. We went to bed early, tired from the hike, but I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound, the soft splash of water from the lake. At first, I thought it was a fish, but then I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I slipped out of the tent, flashlight in hand. The beam cut across the lake, and I froze. There was a figure standing in the water, half submerged, motionless, too tall, almost impossibly so. Its limbs were long, thin, and bent at strange angles. Its head was tilted as if studying me. I blinked and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing, but the water still rippled, though there was no wind. I tried to wake the others, shaking Laura gently, whispering to Nate and Josh. None of them stirred. I checked my phone. No signal, of course, but the screen lit up with a text I hadn't received. Don't move. I froze. My heart was pounding. The text repeated over and over. I wanted to scream, but my voice failed. Something shifted behind me. I spun, flashlight shaking, and for a fraction of a second, I saw dozens of figures emerging from the tree-line, tall, thin, and impossibly still, watching. Then they were gone. Morning came, but it brought no comfort. The lake was calm again, the sun bright, the forest seemingly normal. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination from too little sleep. Nate was brewing coffee, Josh was fishing, Laura humming. Everything appeared mundane, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being studied. We spent the day hiking and exploring, but the forest seemed to twist. Trails I thought I knew looped back on themselves. Clearings were strangely familiar, yet alien. Every few minutes, I caught glimpses of figures between the trees, always at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I looked directly. Nate dismissed it. You're just jumpy. Enjoy the weekend. But I couldn't. That evening, as the sun sank again, something happened that made my blood run cold. The fire died suddenly, though we had fed it minutes before. Shadows leapt across the clearing, unnaturally long, crawling along the ground. Then the whispering started, low, indistinct, almost syllables I couldn't understand, coming from all around us. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the tree line. Figures were standing there, tall, spindly, their heads tilting unnaturally. One stepped forward, and I saw its face, or at least the shape of it, like a mask of darkness, void where eyes and mouth should be. My friends were oblivious, laughing, but I knew they couldn't see them yet. Suddenly, Nate froze. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "They're here." I turned to look, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, into the firelight, hands trembling. The figures were closer now, just beyond the glow. I felt compelled to move toward them, but my legs refused. The night dragged on, timeless. The figures never approached, never spoke, never attacked. They merely watched. And then, without warning, the air shifted. The lake bubbled as if something massive stirred beneath. Ripples spread outward. Then the water receded, revealing footprints in the mud. They weren't human. Long, wide, with deep grooves stretching from the water's edge into the forest. I had an instinctive, horrifying realization. They had come from the lake. They weren't visitors. They lived there. The forest, the lake, they were their domain, and we were intruders. We decided to leave at first light. I packed frantically, urging everyone to hurry, but when we reached the trail, the forest had changed. Trees were denser, paths warped. Every step forward seemed to bring us in a circle. I called out for help, but only echoes answered. Hours, or was it minutes, passed. The sun barely moved. Panic set in. Then Laura screamed. I ran to her and saw what made her shriek, a figure standing beside her. Not like the others. This one was humanoid, human-shaped, but its face was blurred, like it had no features. She reached for me, but her eyes were empty, glazed over. She whispered, "They want us to join." I grabbed her arm, shaking her. Josh and Nate were nowhere in sight. The forest seemed close in. My heart pounded. I ran, dragging Laura with me, following what I hoped was the trail out. Then I saw the lake again, but it wasn't the lake we had known. The water shimmered unnaturally, black and mirror-like, reflecting a sky that wasn't ours. Shapes moved beneath the surface, twisting, writhing, and I knew, somehow, that this was where the figures came from. They wanted us to see. They wanted us to understand. Laura collapsed. I tried to lift her, but she whispered, trembling, "It's too late." I didn't know what she meant, but before I could respond, the water surged, rising impossibly high, and the figures emerged. Not just from the lake, trees, shadows, even the ground itself became them. They were endless, surrounding me, patient, waiting. I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, I was alone on the shore. Laura, Nate, Josh, they were gone. Only the lake remained, calm as ever, as if nothing had happened. The sun hung low. My backpack lay where I had dropped it, my phone untouched. No one would believe me. No one could. I left the forest that day and never went back. I try to forget, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I see ripples on the water in my dreams. I hear whispers in the wind, and I know that they are waiting for the next intruders to wander too far from the trail, to step too deep. The strangest part, and the part that terrifies me most, is that the forest remembers. The lake remembers. And every time I hear about a new camping trip, a new perfect spot, I shiver, because I know that they are patient. They do not forget, and one day, if I'm not careful, they may come for me too. I didn't mean to go camping that weekend. My friends had been relentless, talking about escaping the city, sleeping under the stars, getting back to nature, as they put it. I finally gave in because I thought it would be harmless. I didn't know it would almost kill me. We drove for hours, winding up a narrow road through the mountains. Nate, my oldest friend, insisted he knew a secret spot far from anyone else. I should have been wary when the GPS lost signal halfway up the ridge, and Nate just laughed it off. "Don't worry, that's part of the fun," he said, grinning as if oblivious to the tension creeping up my spine. The clearing we found was beautiful. A small lake reflected the late afternoon sun, and thick pines surrounded us on all sides. It looked like a postcard. We set up camp quickly, eager to start a fire before darkness. The first few hours were easy, laughing, joking, even fishing in the lake. But as night fell, the forest changed. Shadows stretched longer than they should, moving in ways that didn't make sense. The lake, which had been calm and clear, now looked wrong, like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. I felt eyes on me, though I saw nothing. The others didn't notice, or maybe they ignored it. Around midnight, I woke to a scraping sound outside my tent. I froze, listening. There was no wind, no animals I recognized, just a slow, deliberate scraping circling our campsite. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, but when I shone it toward the sound, nothing moved. Yet the scraping continued, stopping whenever I moved the beam. I tried to wake the others. Nate and Jess stirred but didn't fully wake. Only Tyler, half asleep, mumbled something about dreaming and rolled over. I felt a wave of panic. Whatever was out there was intelligent. It knew we were watching, and it knew we were afraid. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely breathing, barely moving. By dawn, the sound stopped, and the forest seemed normal again. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. The others were cheerful, oblivious, and I wanted to believe it too. We spent the morning hiking around the lake, but the trail didn't feel familiar. Trees leaned over us, branches forming unnatural arches. Rocks and roots twisted in ways that seemed almost deliberate, like the forest itself had been reshaped while we weren't looking. I mentioned it to Nate, and he laughed nervously, "You're imagining things," he said. But I wasn't. I could feel the difference. That evening, the lake glimmered in the twilight, almost like a mirror. The air grew heavy, humid, and there was a faint metallic smell. I felt compelled to step closer to the water, and when I did, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, huge, far too long for any human, lined the edge of the lake. They led straight into the water, disappearing without a splash. I tried to alert the others. Nate leaned down to look and straightened quickly, his face pale. Jess and Tyler ignored him. I could tell Nate was scared, but none of us said much. We returned to camp, but sleep came slowly, if at all. Around 2 a.m., I woke to movement. Something was in our clearing. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it shifting between the trees, circling us, patient, deliberate. My tent flap rustled. I wanted to call out, but my voice wouldn't work. And then a shadow fell across my face, a tall shape bending toward me, impossibly thin, stretching higher than the tallest pines. I screamed, and the others woke. Nate grabbed a flashlight, and we shined it toward the edge of the clearing. Nothing. The shadow was gone. But in the lake, ripples spread outward from the place where the footprints had disappeared. The water churned as if something beneath was moving, something large and alive. Panic took over. We packed immediately and tried to leave. But the forest had shifted. Trails looped back on themselves. Clearings we had passed in daylight now looked alien. Trees leaned together, blocking paths we had walked only hours before. No matter which direction we ran, the forest seemed endless. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The sun hung low, static in the sky, and my throat burned from calling out for the others. Then I saw them, figures emerging between the trees. Tall, thin, bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Their faces were blank, featureless. They didn't move like humans. They didn't walk, they glided, and they were watching us. Nate and Tyler froze, their eyes wide, mouths open, but no sound coming out. Jess screamed and ran, disappearing into the trees. I chased her, but she was gone in seconds, swallowed by the shadows. That's when I realized they weren't after us. They were testing us, measuring fear, patience, awareness. I tried to run again, but the forest resisted. Roots twisted underfoot, trees leaning inward. And the lake, I saw ripples forming shapes, hundreds of shadowed forms rising beneath the surface. The figures didn't attack, didn't make sound, but I felt them pressing on my mind, aware of my thoughts, my memories, my fears. Hours later, I stumbled into a clearing that looked like our campsite. The fire was cold, tents collapsed. My pack was where I left it, and then I saw it, my reflection in the lake. But it wasn't mine. My face was elongated, twisted, my eyes black. I stumbled back in horror. Behind me, the water rippled. The reflection of my friends appeared too, featureless, hollowed-out versions of themselves, smiling in ways that didn't belong to them. I realized then that the lake didn't just take time or place. It took people, not fully, not physically, but pieces of them. Their minds, their essence, their being. They were still alive in some form, trapped in the forest, the water, the shadows. They were the keepers. Patient, eternal. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. When I finally emerged onto the road, hours later, or maybe it was days, my car was there, untouched. I drove away without looking back. The forest was silent, unbroken, normal to anyone passing through. I tried to return for them, but the clearing, the lake, the forest, they didn't exist on any map. They had disappeared. My friends were gone. And I know now that anyone who wanders too far into the wilderness, anyone curious enough to explore the perfect spot, can disappear too. Not dead, not alive, but trapped somewhere the forest owns. I tell people camping is dangerous, not because of bears or falling trees, but because some places are alive. They wait. And if you're unlucky, if you go too far, they don't just watch. They take. I survived that weekend, but I don't know for how long I can remain myself. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I feel it. The pull of the lake, the forest, the shadows, and I hear faint whispers calling me back. And I know they're patient. They'll wait. And one day, they might not let me leave. I'd always loved camping. Growing up, weekends in the mountains were my escape, a chance to breathe and forget the world. But that trip, the one with Matt, Sarah, and Dave, changed everything. I still can't explain what happened, and I don't think I ever will. We drove for hours to reach a remote part of the Appalachians. Matt had discovered it on an old map, a trail no one seemed to take. This place hasn't seen people in decades, he said as we hiked the last mile. The trail was overgrown, branches clawing at our clothes, roots snaking across the dirt. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. The air smelled sharp and wet, of pine and damp earth. When we finally found the clearing, it was perfect. A small pond reflected the sky, surrounded by thick woods. We pitched our tents and gathered firewood. That first night, we laughed, drank some beers, and told stories. But even as we sat around the fire, I felt uneasy. It started subtly. The wind had shifted, though the air was still. The forest seemed too quiet. Not just quiet, but hollow. When I glanced at the trees, their branches seemed to lean toward us, just a little, like they were listening. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was the pond, maybe fish jumping. But it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate. A splash every few seconds, like someone walking through shallow water. I slipped out of my tent and shone my flashlight toward the pond. There was nothing. Then I saw footprints. Huge, human-like, but far too long and narrow. They led from the tree line into the pond, disappearing under the dark water. I felt my stomach twist. I ran back to wake Matt, but when I reached his tent, it was empty. His sleeping bag was disturbed, but he was gone. Sarah and Dave stirred but didn't wake fully. I shook them. Nothing. Matt's gone, I whispered. We searched, calling his name, but the forest didn't respond. Or maybe it did, in a way we couldn't hear. When dawn came, we found the first clue. Along the edge of the clearing, the trees were scarred, bark stripped in long vertical lines. Twigs and leaves were trampled in patterns that made no sense, almost like symbols. That morning, we decided to leave, but the trail back had disappeared. The forest we had walked through the day before was gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. The pond stayed in the distance, still and black, though the sky reflected perfectly on it. Every direction looked the same. The air was heavier. I could feel something moving just beyond the tree line, watching. By evening, panic set in. The sun hung low but never seemed to move. We stumbled into a clearing where the pond loomed closer than ever, though I could have sworn we'd been moving away. And that's when I saw them. Figures, standing at the edge of the water. Tall, thin, impossibly still. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They didn't move toward us, but they didn't need to. Their presence was enough. Sarah screamed and ran. Dave and I chased her, but she disappeared into the woods. The figures didn't follow. They only watched. I felt a pull toward the pond, a whispering in my mind, urging me forward. I resisted, terrified. Then the water rippled, and Matt emerged. But it wasn't Matt. His face was wrong. Elongated, hollow, his eyes dark and empty. He reached for me. "Come," he said, but it wasn't his voice. I stumbled back in horror. I ran blindly, branches clawing at my skin, roots tripping me. The forest was endless, a labyrinth that refused to let me go. Hours or days passed. I don't know. When I finally collapsed, exhausted, I woke to sunlight, normal sunlight, and a road I recognized. I stumbled to my car. My phone had signal again. I called 911. The search teams found nothing. No trace of Matt, Sarah, or Dave. Just me. Weeks later, I tried to convince myself it had been hallucinations, a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. But then I found it, a photo on my phone, taken while we were setting up camp. I didn't remember taking it. In the corner of the frame, half hidden behind a tree, a figure stood. Tall, thin, faceless, watching. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. I don't go near forests. And yet, sometimes when I see a pond, a shadow moves beneath the water. I know what it is. They never forget. They wait. And one day, I know, they'll come for me again, or someone else foolish enough to wander too far into the woods. I thought I knew the mountains. I thought I understood the kind of isolation that comes from hours of hiking, the kind where you're only aware of the sound of your own breathing and the crunch of your boots on the dirt. I was wrong. Me, Claire, Marcus, and Jenna decided to take a weekend trip into the backcountry of the Smokies. No cell service, no traffic, just us and the forest. Marcus had found a spot on a topo map, a little-known clearing near an old stream. "You won't find another soul for miles," he said, grinning. That should have been my first warning. The hike was long, but the sun was kind, filtering through the pines and bathing the trail in gold. When we arrived, the clearing looked perfect. A small pond reflected the sky like a mirror, and the forest around it seemed untouched. We set up camp quickly, eager to start a fire and unwind. The first evening passed uneventfully. We told stories, roasted marshmallows, and laughed like kids. But as darkness fell, the woods changed. Not the usual shift of nightfall, but something subtler, stranger. Shadows seemed too deep, the spaces between the trees too still. I felt eyes on us, though I saw nothing. I dismissed it. Campfire stories had always made me paranoid. Around midnight, I woke. I wasn't sure why. Maybe a dream, maybe instinct, but something made me step outside my tent. The pond glimmered faintly in the moonlight, but it wasn't the water that caught my attention. The footprints. They were enormous, far larger than any humans, and led directly into the water. Not a splash, not a ripple, just disappearing as if the pond had swallowed them. My stomach knotted. I woke Claire first. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "What is it?" she whispered. I showed her the footprints. That's when I realized something else. The trees around the clearing were not where I remembered them. Branches twisted in impossible angles. Shadows pooled unnaturally. Something had shifted while we slept. We woke the others and debated, leaving immediately. Marcus insisted it was the work of an animal, maybe a bear. I knew better. I could feel the forest watching us, patient and deliberate. We packed and tried to retrace our steps. The trail had vanished. Not just lost, gone. Every direction led deeper into the woods. The trees pressed closer, roots snagging at our feet. I heard them first. Low whispers, almost indistinguishable from the wind. Then came the rustling, deliberate, circling us from all sides. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't seem real. We stumbled into a clearing, and the pond was there again. Only it wasn't the same. The water shimmered unnaturally, black and reflective, like a portal. On its surface, I saw figures tall, thin, with heads tilted impossibly. They weren't moving toward us, but they didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough. Claire screamed suddenly. I turned and saw her pointing. Not just her, but Marcus and Jenna, all staring at the water. In the reflection, they weren't themselves. Their faces were stretched, eyes hollow, mouths twisted into expressions that didn't belong to them. And behind them, the forest in the reflection moved differently. Trees leaned forward, shadows writhed like living things. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The whispering grew louder, insistent, almost intelligent. It wasn't coming from the pond. It was in my head. Come closer. I tried to fight it. We have to leave, I shouted, but my voice sounded muffled, distant. Marcus stepped forward, drawn by the pond's pull. I grabbed him, shaking him, but he didn't resist. Jenna was next. Claire froze, staring at the reflection, paralyzed. That's when the water moved. Ripples formed shapes, dozens of tall, thin figures rising from below, gliding toward the surface. They didn't have faces, only voids where features should be. They moved with purpose, like hunters, but not after us. Not yet. Suddenly, the forest itself changed. Trees shifted, stretching and twisting as if alive. The clearing disappeared. We were surrounded by endless woods, all uniform, all wrong. The pond was gone, but the sense of being watched remained, thicker, heavier. I don't remember how I survived. Somehow, I stumbled out of the woods at dawn alone. The sun hung in the sky, ordinary banal. My friends were gone. No trace of them. No trail. No footprints except my own. I called the authorities, but search teams found nothing. Weeks later, I returned cautiously to the area, hoping for closure. I found the clearing again, or at least I thought I did. The pond was there, calm and perfect, but when I looked into it, I saw not my reflection, but my friends, all standing in the water, faces voided, staring at me. Then I realized the truth. The pond didn't take them physically. It took pieces of them, their essence, their memories, their very selves, and the forest kept them. I walked away, leaving the pond behind, but I can feel it still. Sometimes I dream of it, rippling in my bedroom, whispering, patient. And I know one day I might not escape. Not the pond, not the forest, not whatever waits in the shadows. Because the forest never forgets. It waits, and it's patient. I'd always thought camping was about freedom. The smell of pine, the crackle of a fire, the endless night sky. That's why I didn't question Matt when he said he knew a place so remote no one had been there in decades. It was a long drive up a winding road in the Appalachians, past abandoned cabins and rusted signs warning travelers away. When we arrived, the clearing looked perfect. A small pond sat at the center, glassy in the afternoon light, and thick pines stretched high around us, their trunks straight and unbroken. I set up my tent, helping Claire and Josh with theirs, while Matt wandered off to scout the surroundings. At first, it was ordinary. We built a fire, ate, and joked. The pond reflected the sky perfectly, the way lakes always do in postcard photographs. I went to bed early, exhausted from the hike. I woke to a sound I can't forget. It was subtle at first, a soft scraping along the ground. I opened my eyes, and the moonlight had shifted across the clearing, though the fire was still burning. Something moved at the edge of the light, just beyond the circle of warmth. I couldn't see what it was, but I felt it watching me. I shook Josh awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He muttered something about the wind and rolled over. Claire stirred, murmuring in her sleep. I left the tent quietly and shone my flashlight toward the tree line. Nothing, just a dark, thick forest. Then I saw the footprints. They were enormous, far too long for any human, leading from the pond into the forest. I backed away slowly, and that's when I felt it. The forest itself was silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Just a thick, unnatural stillness. I woke the others. Matt hadn't returned. We searched for him, calling his name. Nothing. Only the trees responded, or perhaps they didn't. Something answered in the way the shadows shifted at the edge of my vision. We decided to leave at first light, but the trail back had vanished. The woods didn't look familiar. Trees pressed inward, twisting into angles that didn't exist before. Roots seemed to snare our feet, branches blocked our path. Every direction led deeper into the forest. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted. The pond appeared again, closer than it had been before, and in it I saw them. Figures tall, thin, with heads tilted unnaturally. They didn't move, yet I could feel their attention, as if they were weighing us, testing us. Josh screamed suddenly, pointing. In the reflection of the pond, we saw ourselves, but wrong. Our faces were stretched, hollowed, eyes too dark. And behind us in the water, the forest was different. Trees bent impossibly, shadows writhed. I realized then that the pond wasn't just water. It was something else, something alive. Claire stepped forward, entranced. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I grabbed her arm, shaking her, but she didn't resist. The whispering began, not from the water, but inside my head. "Come closer. Join us." I fought it, pulling Claire and Josh back, but the forest around us began to shift. The pond rippled violently, and figures rose from the water. They were taller than any human, their limbs too long, their faces featureless voids. They moved toward us, yet they didn't touch the ground. They glided. I ran. I don't know how long. The woods became a labyrinth, every path looping back on itself. The pond appeared again and again, like a mirror in different places, each time reflecting our terror. Matt's voice came from it once, calling my name, but when I looked, the reflection wasn't him. Exhausted, I stumbled into a clearing that looked familiar. My gear was there, the tents, the fire, the pond, everything ordinary. But then I noticed Claire, Josh, and Matt were there too, standing silently. Their eyes were black, their expressions empty. I shouted their names, but they didn't move. The pond shimmered, and I realized the truth. They weren't gone, they weren't dead, but they weren't themselves. The forest, the pond, the shadows had taken something essential from them, their essence, their consciousness, and trapped it. I understood then that it wasn't the forest that moved or the pond that rippled. We had. Time, space, even perception had been manipulated to test us, to trap us, to mark us. I stumbled back in horror, and that's when it happened. I felt myself pulled toward the pond. My limbs grew heavy, my vision blurred, my thoughts slipping. I screamed, but no sound came. And just as I felt I would be pulled in entirely, I woke. I was back on the trail, alone. The forest was ordinary. Birds sang. Sunlight filtered through the trees. My pack lay at the side of the trail, untouched. No footprints, no pond, no evidence that anything had happened, except the lingering echo in my mind of black eyes staring back at me from the water. Weeks later, I tried to return, but the clearing was gone. The trail didn't exist. Maps showed nothing. The GPS was blank. And sometimes at night, I dream of the pond. I hear whispers urging me to come closer, to step into the water, to see what lies beneath. I survive, but I know it's only temporary. The forest remembers. The pond waits. And one day, I will see them again. Matt, Claire, Josh. Not as they were, but as something else entirely. Patient, endless, waiting. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. I avoid any forest that is more than a mile from a road. But the memory follows me. I know the truth now. Some places are alive, and some horrors are patient enough to wait decades for their next visitors. And I know, without doubt, that one day, the forest will find me again. I didn't think I was afraid of the woods. I grew up hiking in the Appalachians, sleeping under the stars, learning the quiet of the forest. But that weekend changed everything. It was supposed to be simple. Me, Alex, Mara, and Jake a weekend in a remote clearing that Alex claimed nobody had visited in years. The drive up was long, winding along roads that were more dirt than asphalt, lined with pines that leaned over as if to watch us pass. By the time we parked, the sun was low, painting the forest in shades of gold and orange. The clearing was perfect. A small pond glimmered at its center, surrounded by dense woods. We pitched our tents quickly and gathered firewood. Everything felt normal, for a while. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint sounds, the snap of twigs, a rustle too heavy to be a rabbit. I peeked out of the tent and saw the pond under the moonlight. The water was still, almost unnaturally smooth. And then I saw it, footprints, massive, human-like, leading from the tree line into the water, disappearing without a ripple. My stomach twisted. I woke Alex and pointed them out. He frowned, but said it was probably a deer or some other animal. Mara shrugged and muttered something about my imagination. Jake didn't stir, but I knew better. Whatever made those footprints was not normal. We tried to ignore it, but that night, the forest changed. Shadows deepened and shifted. The air grew heavy. I felt watched in a way that made my skin crawl. Then came the whispering, faint at first, like the wind, but insistent, almost intelligent. By morning, we decided to hike back, but the trail had vanished. Trees were twisted, roots snaking across the path in impossible patterns. Every direction looked identical. Panic set in. Alex tried to lead, but even he admitted we were lost. Hours passed, or maybe days, I don't know. Time distorted in that forest, and then the pond appeared again, closer than before. I could see movement beneath the water, ripples forming shapes like dark figures just below the surface. Mara screamed. I spun around and saw something standing at the tree line. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its head tilted in a way no human could manage. Its presence froze me to the spot. The figures multiplied. Shadows emerged from behind every tree, gliding silently toward us. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their attention alone was enough to terrify us. Alex grabbed Mara and Jake, urging them to run, but we couldn't. Our legs were heavy, our minds clouded with fear. Then the pond changed. The water shimmered and blackened. From its depths, a figure rose, taller than any of the others, its limbs elongated, featureless. I realized with sudden horror that it wasn't coming from the pond. It was the pond, or at least something inside it had taken a form to confront us. I screamed, tried to run, but the forest itself resisted. Paths twisted, trees leaned inward, and every time I thought we were escaping, we were back at the clearing. The pond reflected not us, but versions of ourselves, hollow-eyed, distorted, staring back with expressions that weren't ours. Alex reached toward it. Mara and Jake followed. I grabbed Alex's arm, shaking him. "Don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. Their forms flickered like static on a screen, then vanished. I was alone. I stumbled through the woods, disoriented. Sunlight broke through the canopy in uneven streaks, but the forest refused to yield. And then I understood the truth. The forest, the pond, the shadows, they weren't trying to kill us. They were testing us, taking what they needed. Our minds, our fear, our essence. Eventually, I found a trail, a real one this time, that led me back to the road. My car was there, untouched. The GPS worked again. I drove home, shaken, exhausted, haunted. Authorities found no trace of the others. No footprints, no trail, no sign that anyone else had been there. Weeks later, I returned to the area, determined to understand what happened. The clearing was gone. The pond, the trees, everything we had seen vanished as if it never existed. All that remained was an ordinary patch of forest, quiet and unremarkable. But at night, I dream of the pond. The water ripples, and I see Alex, Mara, and Jake standing silently beneath the surface, hollow-eyed, waiting. And sometimes, when I wake, I hear faint whispers outside my window, patient, deliberate, promising that the forest remembers, that it waits. I survive, but I know it's only temporary. One day, curiosity or misstep will lead someone else into that clearing, into that pond, and I will hear the whispers again. Because the forest never forgets, and some horrors are patient enough to wait decades for their next visitors. And one day, I know, it will find me too. I thought I was prepared. I thought I understood what the woods could do. But no one, no matter how many hikes they've taken or how many nights they've spent under the stars, can prepare for the way the forest wants you. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Me, my friend Lena, and her brother Eric. We were driving into the backcountry, far from anything resembling civilization, to a place Eric claimed he had found on an old hiking map. Untouched, he said. No trails, no campsites. Nobody goes there. It's perfect. The drive up was long and winding, a narrow mountain road flanked by thick pines that seemed to bend toward us as we passed. By the time we parked, the sun was low, spilling golden light through the trees. The forest smelled sharp and alive, damp earth mixed with pine resin. We hiked for a few miles until we reached a clearing. At its center was a small pond, still and reflective, surrounded by the trees we had just emerged from. We set up camp quickly, gathering firewood and pitching our tents. Everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. I noticed the silence first. No birds, no rustling squirrels, not even the wind. The forest seemed to hold its breath. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 a.m, I woke to a faint sound, water lapping. At first, I thought it was the pond, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. like someone walking in shallow water. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The pond glimmered under the moonlight, and then I saw them, footprints. They were enormous, far larger than any humans, stretching from the forest to the edge of the water and disappearing beneath its surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a trick of the shadows. I woke Lena and Eric. They groaned and complained, but when I showed them the footprints, their faces went pale. "Probably a bear," Eric muttered. I knew better. Bears didn't make prints that long or narrow, and they certainly didn't disappear into water. We decided to wait until morning before doing anything. But when dawn came, the trail we had hiked to get there was gone. Not overgrown, gone. Trees blocked the way, roots twisted in impossible patterns. Every direction looked identical. Panic set in. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I couldn't tell. Tom had started to feel strange. The pond kept appearing at the edge of my vision, even as we tried to move away. Then I noticed the shadows. They were moving differently now, longer, thinner, bending at angles they shouldn't. Tall figures emerged from between the trees, still and silent, observing us. Their heads tilted unnaturally, like birds watching from a perch. I told Lena and Eric to keep moving, but the forest resisted. Paths looped back on themselves. Trees seemed to close in around us, guiding us back toward the pond. And the whispering began, faint at first, unintelligible, then clearer. "Come closer." Eric stepped forward, drawn by the pond. I grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Don't!" I shouted. Lena was frozen, staring at the water. And that's when I saw it. The reflection. It wasn't ours. Not quite. Our bodies were there, but our faces were wrong. Elongated, hollow-eyed, twisted into expressions that didn't belong to us. Behind us in the reflection, the forest shifted, bending impossibly. I tried to drag them away, but it was no use. The figures from the shadows glided closer, not touching the ground. They didn't speak, but I could feel their attention pressing on my mind, probing, testing. The pond rippled, and the water itself seemed to rise like liquid smoke, forming shapes taller than any human, faceless and perfect. And then it happened. Lena, Eric, both of them were pulled forward, as if the air itself had gripped them. I grabbed at them, but my hands went through something heavier than water, something alive. They screamed, but it wasn't their voices. The pond consumed them, and then the forest shifted again, leaving me alone. I ran. I don't know how long. Hours? Days? The sun moved strangely. Shadows lengthened and shortened erratically. The forest was endless, looping back on itself. I tripped, fell, stumbled, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I emerged on a real trail, one I recognized from earlier. My car was there, just as we had left it. The GPS worked. The road was empty. I drove home in silence, too exhausted to speak, haunted by images that refused to leave my mind. Authorities found nothing. No trace of Lena or Eric. No footprints, no trail, no campsite. Nothing. Weeks later, I returned, not to the clearing, but to the general area. The forest looked ordinary. The pond was gone. The trees were normal. Everything was just forest. I couldn't find any evidence of what had happened. I told myself I had imagined it all, but I know I didn't. Sometimes at night I dream of that pond. I see Lena and Eric standing silently beneath its surface, faces voided, watching me. And then I realize something worse. The pond doesn't just exist in the woods. It exists in waiting, patient, and it can appear anywhere a forest is quiet enough, where the trees lean just so, where the wind doesn't stir. I survive, but I live with the knowledge that it is patient, and one day I will see the pond again. I know it, and next time I may not get away. I have been looking forward to this weekend for months. Camping, hiking, leaving the city behind. Just me and my brother Kyle and our friend Megan. Kyle had discovered an old trail on a topo map that led to a remote clearing in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No one's been there in years, he said. It's perfect, untouched. The drive up was long and winding. The road narrowed as we climbed, flanked by dense trees. Every mile felt more isolated until the outside world seemed to vanish entirely. When we parked and started the last leg on foot, I realized how quiet it had become. Not the normal hush of the forest, but something heavier, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. We reached the clearing as the sun dipped low. A small pond glimmered at the center, and thick pines surrounded us, stretching so high their tops disappeared into shadow. We pitched our tents and gathered firewood, feeling triumphant. For a while, it felt like a dream. Night fell. The first hours passed in laughter and the smell of burning wood. But then I noticed something. The firelight didn't reach far. Beyond the circle of warmth, shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense. Shapes that were too tall, too still, almost deliberate. My stomach clenched. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was the pond, maybe a fish jumped. But the splashing was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like someone walking through shallow water. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The pond was still, but the footprints told a different story. They were enormous, human-shaped, stretching from the tree line into the water, disappearing without a ripple. My chest tightened. I shook Kyle awake. Megan stirred groggily. "Probably a deer," Kyle said, but he didn't sound convinced. We tried to ignore it, but the forest had changed. Shadows pooled unnaturally. Trees leaned inward, branches forming shapes that shouldn't exist. The air felt thick, almost alive. When I stepped closer to the pond, I saw them, figures tall and thin, gliding silently between the trees. Their heads tilted at angles that seemed impossible, watching us. I grabbed Kyle and Megan. "We need to leave. Now." But the trail had vanished. Every direction led deeper into the woods. Panic set in. The trees pressed closer, roots snagged our feet, branches lashed at our faces. And then the whispers began, low, persistent, almost intelligent. "Come closer." I tried to drag them along, but they froze, staring at the pond. When I looked back, I saw their reflections, and I froze too. It wasn't our faces. Hollow-eyed, stretched, twisted into expressions that weren't ours. Behind the reflection, the forest bent in impossible ways, shadows writhing like living things. The water rippled. Something rose from it, taller than the figures in the trees, its limbs elongated and featureless, a void where a face should be. It glided forward without touching the ground. I realized with a sickening clarity that it wasn't just a creature. It was the pond itself, alive, drawing us in. I screamed, trying to pull Kyle and Megan away, but the pond reached for them. Their bodies flickered like broken images, their screams muffled and hollow. I struggled, but their forms vanished beneath the surface. I ran blindly, stumbling through the twisting forest until I collapsed. When I woke, I was on a trail I recognized. Sunlight streamed, through normal trees. My car was parked exactly where I'd left it. The GPS worked. The outside world was ordinary. I drove home, dazed, haunted by the images of their hollow faces and the way the forest had shifted around us. Weeks later, I returned to the area, careful, cautious, desperate for answers. The clearing was gone. The pond was gone. Even a trail I had taken and felt like a memory, not a physical place. I couldn't find any evidence that it had ever existed. But sometimes at night, I dream of the pond. I see Kyle and Megan beneath its surface, waiting silently, hollow-eyed, and sometimes I hear whispers at the edge of my consciousness, patient, waiting. I survive, but I know it's only temporary. I know that one day, the pond will appear again, and it will not wait patiently for long. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. And I know, with certainty, that when it finds me, I will not escape. Because some places in the forest are alive, and some horrors are patient enough to wait decades for their next visitors.
Hope this story followed you into the dark. Like, comment, and subscribe for more nightmares.